here. I've been sick for the last 3 weeks. My options were to either back out of doing this session with you guys or try and give you the best content that I can possible, okay? I apologize if I'm a little bit underprepared, if I say too many ums, if I'm reading off my slides. But yeah, the options were to not do this at all or try and make the best out of it, okay? A little bit about me. My name is Ben Sadeghipour. Most people online know me as NahamSec. I'm a bug bounty hunter. I previously worked at HackerOne as the head of hacker education. I'm almost to 2 million in bounties, and I want to say 70% of that has been since I've gone full-time in 2022 or 2023. And currently, I have co-founded a company called Hacking Hub with Adam, who's also here. He'll be speaking with me tomorrow on our Regex for Hackers workshop here for Bug Bounty Village on the creator stage. Come to that, but yeah, our goal is to pretty much teach the next generation of hackers. I'm also a content creator, and most of you probably know me from my bug bounty and hacking content anyways. And if you want to follow me on social media and subscribe, it's at NahamSec on YouTube, rest in peace Twitter, but X, Instagram, Twitch, you name it, okay? A little bit about this course, because I've mentioned I've not been feeling too good, and I want to make sure you guys get the best out of this. We're going to give this to you for free. The only thing is you have to take a picture of this right now if you want to get access to it. I love that everyone's pulling out their phones, okay? All right. It's a good start, okay? All you have to do is by Monday, the latest, you have to use that code, get it. It will be for free for 30 days the moment we launch the course. It will be out in a couple of weeks, but we're going to do a preview of it here. You will get access to all the labs, all the video content. It will be about an hour or two of content for free, but I'm going to try and pack all of that into the next 40 minutes that we have together, okay? You guys ready? We're going to speed run this. Everyone got a picture? Yeah? All right, I'll put it back again at the end of the workshop too. All right, who here uses Nuclei? Okay, who doesn't use Nuclei and why? All right, so the current state of Nuclei right now is that every single one of you probably use the community curated templates. Am I right? Okay. And you guys are probably not creating custom paths. You're not editing any of them. You probably see that everybody is using the same thing on the same targets, and let me guess, nobody is finding vulnerabilities using these templates, right? There's a problem there. And the problem here is that everyone's just doing this fire off, whether you're using your own server, maybe you're using Axiom, whatever you're using, you're firing it off. I'm guilty of it. I used to just forget that I ran the scan. I never go back and look at the results of it because, let's be honest, there are no results because everybody else is using these. So how come all these other hackers that are claiming they use Nuclei, they're finding vulnerabilities and we aren't, right? So this is what I want to talk about. And the biggest thing is, how many of you actually know how to use workflows here? Okay, what workflow? I know. Anybody know how to use Nuclei to fuzz? Couple hands. Okay, so by the end of this, hopefully, I get to show you the power of Nuclei, the different options that you can use to apply when you use Nuclei outside of Nuclei-T-U, because everybody uses that. We don't want to do that anymore. And I also want to show you workflows. I think that is where Nuclei is very OP. It's very overpowered. It's very good. And if you create these workflows for the things that you like to hack and you are good at hacking or you enjoy hacking on, you're going to find some really good vulnerabilities. And I have an easy one that everyone's just going to go, wow, what the heck, man? Why do I not have that in my workflow? And it's one of the simplest, easiest ones to do. But before we can do all of that, I want to quickly talk about the basic templates, okay? This is typically what a basic template looks like. It shouldn't look like this because it's too simple, but for something really easy, that's what it looks like. You have your name of the template, which is the top part is the metadata and the info. You have to give it an ID. You can skip some of those other options, but the ID is required and has to have dashes, no spaces. But then you give it a name, you give it your author, you give it the severity, really important. We'll talk about that why in just a sec. Then you want to give it tags. Tags are going to be our best friends at the end of this, and I'm going to show you all that in just a sec. The reason why I emphasize on those two is it's going to help us organize these so you're not running 10,000 templates at all times. You are running for a specific thing. I am looking for the specific thing that is marked by, one, the severity, and two, based on the tag. That tag could be a vulnerability type, it could be a tech stack, it could be a methodology, it could be all the Nuclei templates that you have downloaded as community-based that you want to include or exclude, okay? And obviously we need to have a request. We need to say, hey, this is what I want to send to the server, and this is what it looks like. I want to do a GET request, and the base URL is the -u that we give to Nuclei, and we say this is the path. You can have one path, you can have many paths. And then you obviously want to do your matchers, which will get into in just a bit, but the matcher is the one that says, hey, this is the behavior that I want you to match within the response, within this request, and if that matches, that is a valid finding. It could be a vulnerability, it could be it matches what we're looking for, okay? Very basic stuff. Hopefully everybody here is familiar with this, yeah? If you want to invoke your or use your template, you just do a -t path to the folder or the file that you just created. You give it a URL, the most basic form of using Nuclei. But remember this one, we talked about doing tags and doing severity. We can also do it with tags. You can say, I only want to run anything that I have tagged as recon because I'm in the reconnaissance phase. I want to look for all these, I don't know, GitHub instances and Tomcat instances and Atlassian tools, right? You can also invoke it based on severity in tags. So maybe you're not trying to send a bunch of requests to exploit anything, but instead you're trying to look for things that are informative that you can later hack on. Maybe you have a template for this company where it's going to show a specific CMS that they have created or framework that they have created, okay? So another example of it is you can have any type of method in there, right? I'm skipping, by the way, you're going to see me do ... in the beginning for the info. It's a metadata. I'm going to skip it, but it's really good to have. Please get in the habit of creating those. But you have also the approach of creating a request body. You can say, hey, I want to do a post. You have to do one, post, put, get, delete, whatever you want to do. And then you say, these are different paths that I want to go for. API login, whatever the path is. And then you say, I want to set the header as content type. And I want to send the body as username and password, and I want you to look for login successful. So if I get a login successful, it means that they're using this weird password, right? The big thing here is the header for two reasons, because you need to set a header for JSON, obviously, but also a lot of bug bounty programs require you to have a header when you're doing automated scans, right? So when you create these, just throw them in there. I don't throw them in there because I don't want to get caught with my IP address, but you should throw them in there because then they're going to find out who you are and then you're going to get an email from Ari or Harley a little grumpy about it, okay? So just make sure you have those headers in there, but it's a part of the request, so you have to have it in there no matter what. So this is what the three things that are really important in this one. You can also do a raw request. So let's say that you are hacking on a specific application, a specific framework, and you know what the login looks like. All you want to do is send the same request over and over, or a bunch of requests or username and passwords, which we'll talk about in a bit. But you can also give it the raw request. You don't have to do anything custom. You don't have to give it anything else. Just go raw, and here's all lines of the request that you can get out of Kaido, Burp Suite, or whatever tool that you're using. Okay, I'm going to take a sip of water, but I'm going to ask a question. I want you guys to look at this and tell me what is very specific about this dashboard that we can use based on these visuals to create a template, just based on everything on the screen. What's so unique about this that you can put in your template? The table could be one, but what is more obvious? The copyright is a really good one. The internal use is a really good one. Okay, so you can do any of those, right? You can do the memory usage, networks, but the thing that you have to keep in mind is if you're doing those boxes, maybe those boxes and their title change. So you may have one that doesn't have CPU usage, but that's your fingerprint of this, right? So you want to stick to the things that are going to be very obvious, and that is the service status dashboard at the top. Someone mentioned the copyright in the back. Somebody up here mentioned the internal use only. All those things are the things that you want to create. Let's start off with our dashboard right here. We're going to say the name of it is exposed server. The ID is there. Severity is medium, probably not, but we'll leave it as medium for now. Description is the text in open exposed dashboard. And then the tags are like recon. If this is for a specific program, let's say you're hacking on Yahoo and you think Yahoo has this all over the infrastructure, you want to scan for it daily, you throw Yahoo in there, Nginx, dashboards, exposure. Those are just random tags. It's just I want to show you how to organize your Nuclei templates. So let's start with our HTTP request. The basic would be maybe in the web root, maybe it's in stats. If you're saying yes to this, that's wrong because we want to always add more paths. Think of other paths that we can think of, right? Maybe it's dashboard, maybe it's internal, maybe it's admin. I know it's hard to come up with these and get creative, but it's really not that hard to also go, maybe admin is something that's really common for these stats to live in. But also you have AI. You can ask AI to give you a potential list of places that a stats dashboard could show up in, or maybe it could give you other paths, right? And then we want to do something like a matcher condition, which I'll talk about all those in just a bit, but I want to say the status is 200, and I want to look for a regex that matches Nginx, which will look for the Nginx version. I'm going to not talk about that until tomorrow, where we have an entire workshop on it, but we do that, and we also look for some words in there. We say, I want you to match the word service status, dashboard, and internal use only. Okay, so far so good? All right, then you run it like this, You see I use the verbose tag in all of my runs. I'll explain why at the end. But then you run it and it comes back and says, yep, one match was found and this is it. So that's what it looks like when you create your own. Again, you can use -t or you can use the dash tags and call it within those tags. All right, let's talk about matchers, because I think Nuclei as a tool, what's made it super powerful is the matchers. It's the one thing that everyone relies on to find the needle in the haystack that you're looking for, right? So you can match a bunch of different things. I personally like to use anything that's HTTP, and that's what we're going to cover throughout this course. The top two with the regex is one that I would use most of the times, and then DSL is a hit or miss. I'll show you guys all of that in just a bit. I'm going to just fly through some of these because we won't use them, but I want to show you what it looks like. So when you do a matcher, you have to say what type. These are the types we have: status, size, words, regex, binary, hex, DSL. And then you want to say what status do you want it to share. What do you want to do? 200, 302, whatever. Then you want to do maybe a binary. You can do the same thing. Type binary. You can give it a name. And those are the three values that you want to look for. And the condition is or. And then the part where you want to look for is in the body of the response. Maybe you want to do a hex. We probably won't use any of these, but just so you know, you have that option. You have your XPath that you can say, hey, I want it to contain this example domain. By the way, these are all from the Nuclei docs too, so if you see me going through them fast, you can RTF them pretty much. And then you have your DSL, which is really good because then you can now create one line of code that says, hey, if the length of the body is more than this, because maybe the error page is that many bytes, and then you want to do a status go 200, you can do that with DSL. I don't see a lot of good documentation for how to use this on Nuclei, but it does come in handy just when you're combining little bits of information from your target. Like, it's behavior thing that I use DSL for. If the behavior changes because the response is suddenly not what it's supposed to be, then I know that matches what I'm looking for, okay? These are very niche, but when it comes to matchers, you can have multiple. In your matches, you can say, I want you to match this word or this word, or I want you to match this word and this word, okay? Those are really important. I was creating a template for 35 minutes, and I realized I had an or in there and not an and, and I kept going, why aren't you working? And then I realized it was an or and not an and. So it's really important to make sure you have these the right way. And that's kind of what it looks like. You can say, hey, I want you to do these two. In there, you can see it's doing the words, server, Node.js, and powered by Node.js, and it's saying it's or in the header, and the first one is an and in the header, looking for both of those, okay? Then you have your matcher conditions. At the top, you can say how many of those matchers that you have specifically, so you can have multiple matchers, and you can say, I want them to be and or ors. I want it to match all of these, or I want it to match one of those, okay? So you can have a condition that applies to all of the matches that you have written for a workflow, for a template, and everything else. That alone is very powerful because you can just not worry about it and go, it's going to go through all that list. If everything matches, I am not going to have any false positives, okay? Because we want to avoid having those as much as we can. So this is what it looks like. At the top, you say match a condition is, and you can see I have two words matching for the header in there that says the condition is or, but it has to match both of those two. So it has to find one of those two, the PHP, it's an or, and then also it has to have the word PHP in the body, okay? So both of those top and bottom has to work. The top one is an or. Does that make sense? Now, fuzzing with Nuclei, and I think this is one of the underrated parts of Nuclei, and I'm going to show you just a little bit of it because you can do a lot of cool stuff with it, but please let me make you understand that what I'm teaching you here shouldn't be what you apply to finding bugs. It shouldn't replace the process of you looking for the vulnerabilities. This is what I do when I'm in I'm in a desperate time. I'm looking for some vulnerability that I can use in my chain. Maybe I need an open redirect for an SSR, for example, and I want to brute force for it across an entire organization, right? So I just want to preface with that. Please don't think this is the thing that finds vulnerabilities. But if you're in a jam and you need a vulnerability to chain, this is a really good place to go. When you're doing fuzzing, you can specify which area of the HTTP request is that you want to fuzz. That could be the query, that could be the path, that could be the header, that could be cookies, the body of the request, all of it. And I'll show what all that means. But with fuzzing is where we alter the value of the thing that we want to get something that it's a problem. It changes the behavior, whether it allows us to inject a cross-site scripting payload, for example, or it throws an error of some kind, or it finds something that could lead us to a vulnerability. That's the idea of fuzzing with this. So this is what a request will look like, but these are all the different values. We have a key and we have a value for each part. So with the part query, the key here is the parameter ID and the value is 10. The key here is username, the value is NahamSec. So the part here we're looking at is the query. Then we have the path. This is obviously the path we want to brute force for. I wouldn't use Nuclei for this. We can use FFuff and other tools, but you have the option when you want to chain a bunch of different things within the same template. Then we have the parts. It's really important to understand that all the headers in there are a part of the header value, but not the cookie header, okay? The cookie, it's its own thing. But then we have things like the key is user agent, the host could be the one that you change. Maybe you're brute forcing for SSRFs or vhosts with Nuclei. And then you have, obviously, your part is cookie, and you can say, hey, this is some value. I want to brute force the value of something. And then, of course, you have the body where you can also fuzz for, whether it's for usernames and passwords and that kind of thing, okay? I hope you're sitting there going, once I show you the way I use it, you can think of all the possibilities of password brute forcing for default credentials, fuzzing for parameters, automatically fuzzing for vulnerabilities, and so on. We're going to take a look at creating a workflow, and that workflow is going to help us do a bunch of things. It's going to be created for fuzzing templates of your favorite vulns. Maybe it is a single use for a parameter. Maybe we import URLs from a JSON file. Anyone here ever import Swagger JSON into Nuclei and let it test? You can do that. It actually does a lot of DAST for you, which is incredible. And you can also obviously fuzz for vulnerabilities or use them in chains. So the workflow essentially will look something like this. Obviously, the amount of sources I have are not enough. But think about it. You can crawl the entire website. You can use API specs. You can use way more. You can use get all URL. You can get way back URLs. I can't think of all the other tools. You can Subfinder, anything you want. You can use Subfinder to Katana with your cookies, and it gets all those requests and all those paths, right? And then you can feed it to HTTPX maybe to find the ones that are 200, so you're not wasting your time with the ones that are old and 404, and then you do a Nuclei fuzzing, okay? So that's our ultimate goal here. So here's an example of an open redirect with one payload in there, okay? And I'm going to break it down for you. So what we're doing here is we're saying for the HTTP, I want to give it a payload, and we're going to call that payload with a parameter redirect, okay? That's how we're going to call our payloads into our request. And then the third line on the redirect is our payload. I'm not giving HTTP there because you will see it down the bottom, but that's when I will put like NahamSec.com at NahamSec.com, like anything else that I want to put in there. And then you say, I want to fuzz. We start with fuzzing in our template, and then we say, the part that I want to fuzz is the query. I want to do mode single. That means it's going to do every parameter one by one instead of all of them at once and confusing it. And then we say, this is how we're going to fuzz. We're going to add HTTPS before my value of redirect, which is NahamSec.com, and then we're going to run it. And we're going to look for some matchers. Maybe we'll do a regex that looks for a header in the HTTP response and says, hey, if the location changes to any subdomains of NahamSec.com, I want you to alert me, and we're looking for status codes 301, 302, 307. Those are the behaviors that we think is going to be the ultimate end goal as long as it matches both of those. So the location header changes, and we're getting a status code change of 300, then we're solid, okay? And we run it. It is really important to make sure you do DAST at the end, because it will not work without it for the dynamic application security testing. But this is just one of our labs that we have. It's the most basic one. But you can see I've added a bunch of random parameters, but it's testing every single one of those parameters. And the reason why I do verbose with the -v is because I want to see my templates working properly, right? You have to do this all the time, but the first few, I create a lab, I run it, I do verbose to make sure it's sending all the requests, and we get our first vulnerability. You can do the same thing with XSS. You can literally put the XSS payloads in a list instead of my NahamSec.com, and then feed it to every parameter, and all you have to do is look for the XSS payload in the response, right? As long as those closing and opening brackets are there, you're good. I don't send XSS payloads. I just do opening bracket, test 1, 2, 3, 4, closing bracket. If those brackets are in there somewhere, it's a good start. I'll do the rest manually because then I'm intrigued, right? I want to keep looking. When it comes to doing this, you need some really good reconnaissance. You want to heavily crawl your entire target, and you don't want to obviously rely on this to find you bugs. You probably can if you have really good data. I haven't tested this. I think I tested it on Ford once, and I found some leads, but it's a VDP. It's just for me to showcase my case study here. Honestly, in a desperate situation, especially for life hacking events, when someone's like, I need an open redirect. Anyone's got one? Boom, you just go run this against everything that they have historically on their infrastructure, and you hope that something comes out while you're manually also looking for those vulnerabilities, okay? So let's talk about more fuzzing. Earlier, what you saw was I was giving it a list of bullet points of every single payload that I want to try, but I don't have every payload. There's GitHub repositories that you can go to and download them. So we can replace that list. Instead of going parameters space list, we can actually call a file. And you can say a path to that params.txt, for example, and it's going to do it for you. So you can see right here on the left side is, on my left side at least, It is the original payloads that I had, but my payloads list was getting way too long, so now I just flipped it to redirect is path to my or.txt. And you can have 1,000 payloads in there and maybe things that you don't even know existed or tricks that you didn't know existed. But just remember, if you're using someone else's payloads, maybe I am pointing mine to NahamSec.com, but maybe somebody else here is pointing it to list.me. So you want to make sure you clean that list up so your redirect isn't going to somewhere else and then your matcher is expecting something else, okay? I'm talking from experience here. But can we do more? Do you guys think we can do more? We sure can. All right, so we can also find parameters. This one, I think there are better tools for it, but again, if you do workflows and you're automating things, then you can also do it with just giving it the base URL and say, hey, in that base URL, I want to also fuzz for these params. So we define the params that we want to do it, or we want to brute force for. We say the params are parameters.txt, and then you give it the matchers. The type is the status. If it comes back as a 400 because the parameter was missing, I want you to do these things for me, okay? And, the thing with this one is we don't want it to be a 400. We're doing a negative matcher because when you send a request on API, most of the time you get a 400 request when it's missing a parameter. So now we're saying as soon as that 400 changes to anything else, I want you to match it and tell me. So we're saying status 400. If it's make it negative, as long as that is not true, you alert me. So the parameters.txt says params. It's going to be replaced with our params as in our path. So params goes to param, and the base URL is what we give it in this dash. Yeah. So anything that you want for your parameters. Maybe you can get a params.txt from GitHub or something. And then you run it. You can see I'm doing something like API paper. It goes through a bunch of different parameters that I have, and it says, yep, I just found something that matches the parameter file that is no longer coming back as a 400 where it was missing a parameter, okay? Does that make sense? Can we do more? Maybe. We can actually take this a step further. You can actually param mine and look for vulnerabilities. Same thing. This is our original template that we just looked at, but we're going to make a couple of changes here. We want to change the base URL and params, and we also want to change the way the payloads are being handled, and we want to change our matchers. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to change our base URL to account for both params and payloads. So you can see now I'm doing params, but I'm also saying it equals to payloads. We're going to do an attack cluster bomb, but on the right side, instead of having payloads just be params, we're going to add params or parameters, and also now we have a payloads or payloads.txt. So the payloads are going to go where the payload is in our placeholder, and the params are going to go where the params are. But we can also define vulnerabilities within this. I don't recommend doing them all in one. You can see that I've put a condition of or because it's different vulnerabilities. I don't recommend doing that, but you can do that for different XSS techniques, right? You can say, maybe I'm in a script tag, for example, I want to do this one. Maybe I want to do a image tag. Maybe you're going after a filter, right? You want to see what ones work and what ones don't. But you can do that and define it. This one is for true vulnerabilities. We go back to our last example, we run it, and it comes back and says, yep, I just found a etc password with the matcher that you gave me within this API. So you can create some sort of a scanner for yourself for different vulnerabilities, customize it with different payloads. It looks for the parameters, it looks for the payloads, and hopefully it finds you some vulnerabilities. There's a lot of more stuff you can do. You can obviously look for passwords. Now that you know how to do both values of payloads and params, you can just change this to username and password, for example. We talked about DAST. I give you an example for WAFs. We talked about parameter name fuzzing, but there's also API hacking, and that is something that I discovered recently that I feel like a lot of people don't use when it comes down to Nuclei. Again, Nuclei shouldn't just be for CVEs. I know that's what most people use them for. And new vulnerability comes out, everyone makes a template and scans it, but there's also this value of having a Swagger file that most companies always have available for you. And you can do a lot of cool stuff outside of using it for scans. So the one thing that I gotta tell you with this is a lot of times these API docs, they don't have a server URL in them. So you have to add that in there because it's gonna be confused, and I'll show you what that means. So this is the one that we have. I know it's hard to read, but the path for this one is just /API. It says URL is /API. Or sometimes it says localhost maybe in there. And if you run that, you're gonna get a bunch of errors. So if I'm doing my verbose, it shows that it's making a request to /API staff, and it's, hey, it's missing things. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna add this into it. So now I'm adding the URL for where the API is. So Nuclei knows where to send these requests. You can't do that with -u. I've tried. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. Could be a skill issue on my end, but I couldn't figure out how to do it with a -URL. So hard-code it in there. If you don't know how to do it for OpenAPI, if you don't know how to do it with Swagger, AI is really good at it. Just feed it to an LLM and it will do it all for you. The way you invoke it is you just go -l OpenAPI JSON -im, which is the input mode that you want to do, which is your OpenAPI, Swagger, and any other imports that you have, and you can do dast, and it's just going to use all of their, actually, Nuclei has a lot of templates. They're okay. The community-created ones are decent, but think about all the things that I showed you so far that you can create and look for vulnerabilities doing this, okay? And that is something that I've talked to a lot of people. 9 out of 10 people don't know you can scan Swagger with this, which is incredible because I find a lot of those Swagger.jsons and just think you can create a workflow. If Swagger.json is found, then invoke this thing, which is going to be our next one. So again, this is how you do it. But the cool thing that you can do, and if you're an automation nerd like I am, you can actually have Nuclei give you all the requests that it has created based on the JSON file, and you can just pull them out of the input and maybe feed it to other tools or just import them to something else that you want to scan with. And you can just literally do some regex, do some file editing to just get the URLs, path, and parameters, and just have a list of all those that were created from a massive Swagger file, for example, okay? With workflows, and the thing that I keep looking to make sure I have enough time to cover is this one, and I'm going to give you the most basic example that I know most people probably don't do, and I did a little bit of research. I couldn't finish this, but I didn't think anybody has even published saying, hey, maybe look for Tomcat credentials when you find a Tomcat instance instead of running all these Tomcat CVEs that are available to us. So the way the workflows work is it's very much an if-then. If this thing is true, then do these things. Those things could be tags. Those things could be severities. Those things could be CVEs, could be templates, could be anything, right? And it does it and it ends it. So the problem with not using workflows and what we're doing nowadays is there's no context. We're shooting 1,000 requests to one web server hoping one of these scans work. When you have workflows for them, you just run workflows. You start off with workflows and then you get desperate. You can run your 10,000 templates that you have. So when are workflows good? When you have identified a repeatable pattern of vulnerabilities. That could be credentials, that could be endpoints, it could be paths. When you want to detect specific vulnerabilities, when you want to create something very specific for GitLab, Jira, Tomcat, so on. This company is using a lot of X tools or X backends. You can create a workflow for it. And the way to do workflows is with a -w. It's the better way to run a workflow than just putting them all with your templates. And then you do path to your workflows and you give it a URL, okay? You can also do them one by one. So if you have a specific one you want to run on your target, then you can just do the path like you do any template. Okay, let's talk about creating an example for Tomcat. This is actually the default Tomcat workflow that Nuclei gives you. It is great. It works because it works based on the tags Tomcat. If I have any template that has a tag Tomcat, then I want you to run it. But what's missing in all those templates that are tagged with Tomcat is the part where you brute force for username and password. So you have to create your own, and then you have to tag it as Tomcat. So when you find a Tomcat with it, it triggers this brute force for you. And you can also tell them like, hey, I want you to use a specific workflows or templates to identify if this tech is Tomcat, if it's Nginx, if it's Apache, and so on, okay? And then obviously we have our sub-templates of tags, which I think I've mentioned tags a million times. I hope it's the one thing you take away from this workshop is to tag everything so it runs smoothly. But then we want to do our raw request. We say, hey, I want you to make a request to get HTML. You can do your semicolon manager HTML, then the host name, and then you can add a basic base64 username and password because that is how authentication to Tomcat works. So we have our GET request, we have our tag, but now we need to define our payloads. Our payloads are going to be our username, which was in their username and password. We're going to do an attack cluster bomb, and then we're going to do a matcher that says both of these have to match. The status has to become 200 from a 401, and then I want to see the words Tomcat or application manager. And we're doing a cluster bomb because we're going to be doing all of the usernames with all of the passwords. Not a one-to-one, it's one for all the passwords, okay? So we want to match every single one and see which ones work. If you don't know how the different attack flows are, actually Burp Suite and Nuclei both have different terminology around this, I think, when I was looking at it, but these are different ones. You saw me use cluster bomb earlier for parameters. Battering was the default that we used. Now we're doing cluster bombs because we're doing a list and we want to use the value for both of those lists for both of our username and passwords. And when you run that and you do a -w Tomcat and that username and password works, it's going to trigger this and give you that the username and password worked as well. The workflows are the thing that I wanted to highlight because of the fact that just think about all of these different tools that are out there that you see people are saying, oh, I just found default credentials on X. I found default credentials on Y. The way that I've seen people do based on what I've asked on my Discord and people that come up to me is, no, I just run the ones on Nuclei. It tells me which one is Tomcat and I manually try it, or I go and use another tool that brute forces for me. Why? You can just add another template of your own, tag it as the one you want and do it. And you should create these for all these common vulnerabilities, all these common backends that exist out there. So a couple of tips on using Nuclei before we wrap this up, because I think we only have 10 more minutes. The first one is always run a validate on your templates. You do a /validate and you give it the template. It will tell you if there's any issues. If you have a typo, if you're using something that doesn't get recognized by Nuclei. Maybe you were like me and one of your servers, the Nuclei version is really old, and the thing that they introduced to the new documentation doesn't exist in that. This will help you figure it out. The next one is I run most of mine when I create them in debug mode, because the cool thing with debug is that it actually shows you everything that is going in and everything that is coming out of that web server when you send that request, and it looks like this. So you're seeing what is being sent to the server and what is coming out. So you can see this one is one that I'm doing param mining for, and it wasn't working at first. I ran debug and I was like, oh, I see what the problem is. I'm going to go change that. And last but not least, always create some sort of a lab for yourself. Create some fake HTTP server with Python that just prints out whatever you're looking for so you can test it out on your own. And the one thing that I think you guys mostly saw me do is a dash verbose for my templates until I start trusting them. It takes a couple of days of using them, a couple of tries until I can trust them. And honestly, you can use GPT for a lot of these labs. You can just go and say, hey, create me a web server that does X, Y, and Z, maybe sets the HTTP header to a specific thing and the status to a specific thing, and prints out the specific word for you. And hopefully now, after the slides and you guys watching these, the current state changes from what we talked about earlier in our talk, or when I started the slides, to more of understanding all the different options, all the flags, all of the power that goes behind using Nuclei. Hopefully you're not just using Nuclei to run the templates that come on default. You can maybe go and visit some of those default templates and add paths to them. Those paths don't account for context. They don't account for custom paths of those specific things that you're looking for. And obviously go and write your own templates. And the other cool thing is, while I was creating this, I realized a lot of people actually open source their workflows, they open source their templates on GitHub too. So go on GitHub and look for some of these and see how other people are doing them, and maybe you can get some inspiration on how you want to create your own. Hopefully this is no longer how you use Nuclei, because I know that's what we talked about earlier. It's Subfinder, Nuclei, zero findings, and you start using Subfinder with Nuclei workflows, and you're increasing your chances of finding leads that could give you some leads or vulnerabilities as well. And again, as always, if you want to get this for free, because I couldn't get this to the point that I wanted to due to my health, please take a picture of this. You're more than welcome to enroll in this in the next 4 days. Monday is when this code will stop working. And after Monday, once we launch the course, the day it starts, you get an email. You'll have 30 days access for free. Then you can just repurchase if you want, because we're going to keep on growing this course. And again, thank you all for joining me. If you have any questions, we can maybe do a couple minutes of questions and then wrap this up. So what you can do is you can do a scan for Swagger or OpenAPI and then pipe the answers back to Nuclei to run a workflow for this. So there's a lot of either piping or creating workflows. You can't workflow the two. You can't workflow discovery and exploitation, from what I understand.